Okay, hello everyone, welcome and thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about the global fight against coal and how communities from around the world organise to resist this. My name's Jack. I'm from the northeast of England, a place that's still plagued by the politics of coal. I've been involved with XR since we formed a regional group back in November 2018. Now, we're in unprecedented times with coal combustion producing more than a third of today's global CO2 emissions. It's also a major contributor to adverse effects on communities, the environment and public health. So what can we do about this situation? What's being done? And in the next hour, we're going to explore the history of coal usage. We're going to take a look at some of the reasons we're in this mess. And we're going to discuss some of the actions and communities involved in resistance against coal. So I'm going to briefly introduce our guests. Let's see, we've got Kathrin Gutmann from Europe Beyond Coal, which is a campaign whose aim is to phase out coal in Europe by 2030 and to accelerate the transition to a clean energy future for all. We have Rumana Hashem from the Phulbari Soldarity Group, which is a transnationalist group who are supporting communities from the Phulbari region of Bangladesh in their fight against opencast. We have long-time old campaigner here from my neck of the woods in Pont Valley. We have Anne Harris from Coal Action Network. And Coal Action Network work to mobilise communities who are impacted by coal production. And then we have Rich Felgate, who is a documentary filmmaker who's been recording some of the communities we're going to be talking about. So I'm here because I've been involved with resistant communities, and I'm going to give you a quick introduction to my story, and then I'm going to ask each of our guests to briefly introduce themselves so that I can bring them all in at the beginning. And then we'll have 10 minutes of questions to each of you. And then hopefully an opportunity, if we don't overrun too much, where we'll have 10 minutes at the end to tie up any loose ends and to have more of a conversation and for you to ask questions of each other. So, if there's opportunity for discussion, go with it, and we'll just see how it goes. So, I grew up in the eastern coalfields on the coast, and later, when I had my family, I moved to the northwest Durham, which is largely open cast coals. Now in Durham, we're built on coal. And there's very working class communities, and we don't forget that it's on the sweat, on the backs of the sweat of the men's that we actually were able to fuel the Industrial Revolution and make Britain a dominant global power. In the 80s, when the mines were closing, we had a saying, coal not dole, because our fight was about lack of jobs. It wasn't about keeping mines open at all. It was about keeping jobs for people. And the other mantra of ours was, don't let the bastards grind you down, because I know that it's hard when you're fighting against the powers that be, and you're in a community and often feeling very, very voiceless, and newspapers are willing to, give the opinions of the corporations and the government, and then our voices tend to get lost in that fight. So we were just trying to get bread on the table, and we, as communities who were fighting, we lost a lot more than just our jobs. We lost a lot of community and a lot of connection, which was a wonderful way to grow up. Right, I had a really wonderful childhood, of allotment foods and, close communities. So simultaneously, I found myself fighting in a place where I was fighting to keep deep mines open, and I was fighting to close down opencast. And I think sometimes it's a more nuanced argument in the Northeast than people sometimes are aware of. But we believe that while deep mines actually built communities, opencast destroys them. It doesn't offer anything to the communities whose land and amenities and culture that are often destroyed. So, I often think, did I think back then, because a lot of this, when I first started my first opencast, it was back in the 80s. And I was thinking, did I then think of myself as an activist? That term, at what point do you say, yes, I'm an activist? And I think back then, I just thought, I'm just a mum. That's all I was. I was just a mum that wanted to bring my children up in a nice, good environment. And what I saw was that the countryside around us was just being decimated. And the decimation of opencast in Northwest Durham has gone on since the 50s, but was actually a fight that it helped to close the deep mines down. So don't ever let anybody tell you that the miners are for opencast, because I should think that a lot of them actually not. They understand what's going on. So what happens in an opencast? It's really awful when you know a bit of land intimately, and you can walk. I used to we used to make wine and visit fairy circles and all of these beautiful things that often people don't have the opportunity even now to appreciate. And what I found was that on living 300 meters away from an opencast, it fairly dominated your life. Yeah, there was a lot of dust about, cars got, you could see the dust and the grime, you could just feel it. And some of the old fellas that I knew, they used to remind us, they used to say that the dust that comes from opencast is the same dust that killed people down the mines. Yeah, a lot of miners had a condition called black lung, was its familiar term, or popcorn lung, where the particulate would get into your lungs and you would have difficulty breathing. And so the old fellas used to say, like, we used to go down the pit to do this stuff. We don't want it in the air where our bends are. Yeah, so that was another awareness that people people had. So my daughter was born, like I say, 300 meters away from an opencast, never got into the countryside that we lived around. And in fact, I took her to kind of a sister village, the next village over, to be able to play on the land over there. And in recent years, I've had to go back to help the community there fight the campaign. They have been fighting at Pont Valley. It's only a few miles away. They've been fighting for 30 years, around about the same time as the opencast that I lived in decimated the land. It's about 1.5 million tons of coal, I think, that they dug out of Chapman's Well site, and then later at the Pont Valley. My daughter moved into that community, and within a year they were ripping up the land again. So, my family has had the deep mines, and then it's had Chapman's Well opencast, and then it's had Pont Valley opencast. So I'm interested in how we maybe tell the stories of people who are actually living these conditions. And, you know, we'll find out, I'm sure Anne's going to, well, all of you are going to have some experience of this in countries around the world. And I'd be really interested to find out how those communities, what sorts of problems that they have, and you know, and how they cope, because I gather some of these are huge, huge minds that we're going to be talking about. So let's see, I'm going to get on, and let's see if we can all, if I can give you the space now, Kathrin first, then Rumana, then Anne, and then Rich, and if you could all just give us a brief introduction, just something quite short, so that we can set a background of where you're from. Over to you, Kathrin.
Hello, good to see you all. So I'm calling in from Berlin, Germany. Kathrin's my name, and I'm with the European Coal Coalition. We're an NGO coalition, and that's active, you know, all the way from Portugal to the Western Balkans, UK, Finland, all the way over to Greece. So it's a really big coalition. We also work with groups outside of Europe as part of a global networking. Our goal is to exit coal by 2030, and we really, you know, strongly look at you know, each of the plants and each of the mines to make sure that they get closed down. Exactly, also with the motivation of what you've described, the destruction that comes with it. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Kathrin. Rumana.
Oh, hi. I direct the Phulbari Soldarity Group, which is a transnational activist group, and it is a network founded by eyewitnesses, including myself, to coal murders in Phulbari. It's quite a lot harder and I would say horrible experience that I had in Bangladesh. So I'm originally from Bangladesh. I was born in Dhaka, but I'm currently based in the UK. So I try to support those communities who has been facing violence, not only that some coal and pollution. So the group exists to oppose the coal mines and coal plants as well. We oppose all sorts of coal mines, deep and opencast, and we support and represent communities located in the northwest region of Bangladesh. My professional background is an academic. I'm trained as a political sociologist, and I teach at the I was teaching at the University of Warwick. So I will tell you more how I got involved in this when I talk about the whole movement.
And I'm Anne, I'm from the Coal Action Network. I'm originally from the northeast of England, but we work nationwide against coal mines, power stations, and also in support of communities in Colombia, the US and Russia in particular that are fighting coal mines to supply the UK with coal for electricity and industry.
Rich.
Hi everyone, my name's Rich. I'm a documentary filmmaker and an activist, and I'm currently working on a documentary following communities resisting against open cast coal. Specifically the campaign we've already heard about in Pont Valley, and also people resisting to save the Hambach forest in Germany from Europe's biggest open cast mine.
Right, lovely. Now, I've just realised, everyone, of course, we've started 15 minutes late. So we're really going to have to, that only really leaves us half an hour left for this discussion. So I'm going to encourage you to break the rules. And, you know, if you want to join in, you know, then feel free to feed people with questions and see if we can get something going. First, Kathrin, I'm just going to ask you for a little bit of information. Can you give us the background on what's been happening with coal usage since the 1700s? And maybe, you know, kind of explain a little bit about the science behind coal burning?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it all started in the UK, really, with the Industrial Revolution and using coal. And that's where it then spread all across the world. And I think that's why whenever there are fights against coal in the UK, and when you are winning in the UK against, where open cast mine doesn't get open, or a deep mine gets closed, or plants close, it's global news because everyone associates coal with the UK still. That's where it really started. And hard coal mining across Europe was done for many decades, but it became uneconomic and they started closing down. So we only have a bit of hard coal mining happening in some places, and it really is a lot of it is imported, exactly as Anne said, and also from Russia, which comes with a lot of destruction, a lot of imported coal that we're burning. And then we've got a lot of lignite mining, and that's always done in open pit way, and it's very destructive. And we still have villages that are threatened. So we've got the story of the Hambach forest, but they're like the mines in that area are also threatening several villages from destruction, where people are still losing their homes. In the year 2020, that's still the fight that we have in some parts of Europe, which is crazy, I have to say. But at the same time, because we're importing so much coal, like when we started doing some really, more concerted networked campaigning in 2016, there were 320 coal power plants in operation across Europe. Yeah, and then quite a few mines across Europe. But we've been having quite some impact as civil society. So we now have, of those 320 plants, 144 of them are either retired or announced to retire, right? So that's just within 5 years. So there is progress happening. There's less and less coal being burnt in European coal power plants. We still have, quite some work ahead of us, but us working together, we're having quite some impact. And just to say why it's so important, and it goes a little bit to the science of coal burning, is because coal is so CO2 intense. Now we have to get rid of all fossil fuels. That's completely clear. Coal is particularly CO2 intense. And that's why when we work with scientists that look at, okay, if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, how fast do we need to exit coal in order to put us on that pathway? And for EU countries, Europe and the UK, not an EU country anymore, and OECD countries, it's by 2030 or earlier. And then globally, it's by 2040. And that's really ambitious. So that's why us working together is so important to make that happen.
I was actually just going to ask you, Kathrin, did you think it was ambitious enough? Because as XR, we've got a date 5 years ahead of the 2030. So what do you think about that? You're saying it's ambitious. Do you think we're being too ambitious?
No. I think that the thing is you can't be too we have to be ambitious, push the boundary, because this is the time. Coal is becoming so uneconomic. Next to that, it's also meeting so much resistance. People don't want that polluting and destructive coal anymore. And so we're in the space of where we have the alternatives. We can build, if we build the right kind of renewables, we can build the renewables, we can build storage, use less electricity. And I think, like, because we have the alternatives now, we shouldn't be putting up with any of that destruction that comes from coal. We're exactly in that space, and people have understood it.
Yeah, can I ask you, Kathrin, you're saying that there are alternatives. Do you think the alternatives are enough, or do you think we have to change our ways as well?
Well, so there is quite a bit we can do if we build a renewables-based power system. It's holistic. But yes, certainly, I think like a larger changes to the way we live. Not just using less electricity, has also to do with our lifestyles. Those are all elements of that. There's quite a few different things we need to be doing. A renewables-based power system can get us a good way there, but it's not going to be enough.
Okay, so if we're changing our ways, because as XR we say that, you know, kind of looking at your own life and trying to do those small things isn't really going to have a huge impact. So we have to go for, you know, government and corporations have to make this decision. However, I know I've sat around with academics before talking about this, and they will say, you know, the corporations will say, well, we can't make the changes because the people don't want the changes and we can't move them. You know, so we get into this kind of cycle where nothing happens because everybody's saying nothing can happen because of them.
Yeah, absolutely. You run into that a lot. So the way we work also in our coalition is that we combine it all. So people power is vital, and we're achieving a lot with that, you know, which includes the protests on the site, on coal sites, but it's also taking people power to the annual meetings of coal utilities and being present. And we're also going to the financiers that are funding coal and being present there, and then doing advocacy work. And at the same time, like another route that we're taking is litigation, going through the courts, and it's been, you know, really important in what you've been doing in the UK as well. And then we can also find allies. So I don't think we're citizens, we're alone here. So we have allies also in the world of financiers now, as well as also on the corporate side, that are, you know, more and more understanding of what it takes. And then if you take that together, then on the one hand, yes, we need the policy changes and the government changes, but I really, really think that there's also things we should and can be demanding from corporates themselves and from financiers. There's a lot they can be doing, and there's no reason to hide.
Okay, who do you think has the power then to?
It's, you know, like financiers pulling out their funding is actually a really important one, and you've got, you know, as a financial hub in the UK, that definitely makes a difference. And for example, the coal industry in Poland is saying that they're having trouble accessing international finance because we've gotten to a point where more and more funders are saying, well, no, we can't fund you because you want to open another coal mine or plant. So it's starting to have that kind of impact. And at the same time, governments saying, you know, we want to exit coal, or communities taking the decision to, you know, not open a open cast mine. There are a lot of different intervention points that can make a difference. And that is not the one thing. And that's why it's so important for all of us to work together, because it takes, you know, all of us.
That's great. Thanks, Kathrin. Rumana, can you tell me, you know, can you tell me how many people have been displaced by the opencast that you're working on in Phulbari?
Okay, so basically Phulbari opencast coal mine was only a proposal by a British mining company. It was called Asia Energy, which has now changed their name, and it is called Global Coal Management Resources. If built, it would have forcibly displaced up to 220,000 people from within a very overtly crowded area, because Bangladesh itself is overpopulated, you would probably know, and Phulbari is not a huge space. It's a small upazila. Upazila means that it's not really a region as such. It's like Durham kind of, that one small place in northeast. So Phulbari is located in northwest region of Bangladesh, and the fact that the people mobilized so powerfully and well was the fact that people were going to lose their homes, and not only that, but that the opencast coal mine would have totally devastated the whole ecological system in the northeast region, and probably it would have moved on to kill the environment. The Bangladesh is very green and tropical country where we have so many renewable sources for renewable energies. So we have sun, we could go for solar. So why coal mine? That was the first thing. And as you pointed out, both of you, Kathrin, and you both have said that the effects of coal mine, of any kind of, coal itself is really harmful for people. I'm just surprised by hearing that in your case, you didn't really protest the deep mining because you wanted to keep a livelihood, which is understandable. But in the case of Bangladesh, the livelihood was never been dependent on coal, you see. And the coal mine was protested so well because when people have said, because the British mining company Asia Energy has first conducted a 3 months pilot project. So people have seen exactly what you were saying at the start, that the coal are coming out of the ground and then just spread over the green, lovely field where the women, especially women, have taken a really leading role in the movement. And that's also one of the examples is myself as well, being so deeply involved for 13 years. We have put a halt to the project for 14 years, really, not 13 years now. And that is because women would grow their own crops in the green field. It's a very tropical country and people are not really so wealthy as yours in the UK or Europe. So people live on their very tiny little homegrown crops. And if you are killing that little resource, they die. And there would be not only that homelessness, but nutrition problem, food problems. It appeared that if the mine was allowed, then we would have 75% of the region would have suffered from malnutrition. And so these are serious issues. And there are 23 communities in Phulbari working against the project. So the communities are huge. It's not just 1 or 2 communities that would be vanished over the course of 30 years of extraction, because the coal mine would have extracted coal from the mine for 30 years. So that's completely, totally unacceptable. And it would have also taken away 14,600 hectares of land. Hectares means that 1 hectare is equal to 2.5 acres of land. So you could see that how much green land, cultivable land, are going to the coal mine, which changing people's livelihood. So people were quite moved by the fact.
Okay, so in exile, we're causing a lot of disruption because we want the government to act and introduce new measures. What would success look like to your campaign? What would that look like?
So that's a big question. Success at the moment, Phulbari Soldarity Group, this network that we have developed actually has been looking for a delisting of multinational extractive companies. It's not only the coal companies that we protest, but we also say that any sort of coal plants, fossil fuel industries shouldn't be really totally stopped. Because I think it is a controversial issue. You might say that, okay, we stop all fossil fuels, so how do we live in European context where we don't have so much sun? But yeah, I see that it is still possible because you have lots of wind. At least in the UK, I find it so hard to walk on the street in winter because of wind. So use the wind. Of course, there are also arguments against wind, but not as bad as coal would affect us. So, well, we are not currently working on every issue. Currently, we're focusing on Phulbari because the coal mine, I haven't told you the horrifying story. that the coal company who wants to build the opencast coal mine has inflicted violence to such extent that 3 young kids have been killed in a protest of over 80,000 people. So that was back in 2006 when I particularly got involved. I have been an environmentalist activist from my girlhood. It's because Bangladesh is a flood-affected country. So in 1988, when I was a really little girl, I was only 13 years old, and our house was literally going to sink. So the whole house, our family home, my parents' house, has turned into a relief camp. Currently, I don't know if you know, we are having another devastating flood right now. So this is the worst in 2 decades. So after 1988, we didn't have such a bad flood like this year. So in 1988, as I was a young girl and I had seen my parents were serving the communities, cooking in our household, because the house was located in a little higher kind of place, but the rest of the town in Dhaka were totally underwater. So that made me anywhere aware of the environment, that how communities should live, how we should keep our homes safe and look after each other, because the governments, always the Bangladesh government, have been failing people badly in terms of support system. So since then, I was always involved with communities, but becoming activist didn't happen until I was in University of Dhaka. But then again, another flood made me serious environmentalist activist. In 1998, we had another battle. So that's how I was anyway in touch with various communities. So in Phulbari, when people first started to mobilize, that was back in 2003. I was studying in Germany at that time. So I wasn't actually part of that movement until I went back home in 2005, late 2005. And I started to read a lot of, it was very well organized, I would say, that a lot of research articles. So the first bits were that academics were deeply involved, scientists were involved, they were discussing, economists were involved. The project, Phulbari Coal Project, doesn't bring anything to people. It changes your livelihood. It would devastate people through the pollution, but also displace so many people. But also it wouldn't have bring in any money to the government, because the company, Global Coal Management Resources, is going to enjoy a 9 years tax holiday, and they would only give 6% tax to the government out of all the coal. So it didn't really make sense to people. And I got involved because people asked me to come and see what's happening in Phulbari. So on the 26th of August in 2006, when people eventually brought a whole kind of like nationwide consensus, and then also so people went to Phulbari, I also went, and I was volunteering mainly as a kind of observer to guide people not to be indisciplined, try to be nice. But I never knew that there would be so many people. 80,000 people were marching around the whole town and all over Phulbari. And suddenly, out of my shock, I still get very affected as I speak. Suddenly, shooting started for no reason. There were lots of police, as you also have in Pont Valley. I'm sure Anne will speak about this, that police would be always doing their kind of policing, but it wasn't police who did the shooting. And 3 kids just died right there. And there were over 200 people injured, badly injured, blood on the streets everywhere. As a volunteer trying to guide people, I myself was vulnerable. So my involvement is not just in environment as an environmentalist in this project, but working for rights and justice. So the first point that I said at the start that Kathrin was talking about, you are talking about the coal is phasing out of Europe, but it's entering Bangladesh and Asia and those countries that never did depend on coal. In Bangladesh, there was only one deep mine and that has been shut down as well because the Chinese company who was building it in Barapukuria, they failed and it just collapsed and people didn't want it back. Now, what's happening that you are working here very hard. I'm with all of you too, because I also work in exorcise. And so we are working here to phase out of coal in Europe. But this coal business should not go to another country. These coal companies are funded by organizations, financiers like HSBC, another London listed bank, RBS, London listed, Barclays. Now Barclays have recently withdrawn because of our policy advocacy. But the question that I always really feel hunted by is that, are we really working for one planet or two different ones? So if we are phasing out here, we should be mobilizing and do a connected struggle so that other parts of the world also don't get affected. And so Phulbari Solidarity Group's aim is that connection and trying to do coordinated collective struggles with all of us, north, east, south, west, and everywhere.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you, Rumana, for that, because I think it's really important that sitting here in the UK, that we do understand what's happening in other parts of the world, that we get to hear stories from people like yourselves, rather than through traditional media that tends to have its own little warp on things. Anne, I'm going to come across to you now because Coal Action Network, I know you're working within the UK, but I've heard you talk about other places that you've been to. Can you just give us an overview of the mines that you have been involved with in a broader sense?
So the Coal Action Network's based in the UK. And at the moment, there are 2 proposals for new opencast coal mines, both by a company called Banks Group, one on the outskirts of Newcastle upon Tyne, and one slightly further up the coast near Druridge Bay. And then there's an application for an underground coking coal mine on the opposite coast in the northwest. And we as an organisation are trying to stop coal mining here, and that's definitely our roots. But what we noticed was that if a local group is campaigning against a mine in a certain valley in Wales, for example, that mine may not go ahead, but another one may go ahead in a different Welsh valley. And so we need to come together and stand united and say, actually, we don't need this coal. And then that leads us on, obviously, to look at the power stations. And now the government has said it will probably phase out coal in 2024. It's committed to do it by 2025. And a lot of people think, oh, that means we've won on coal, we can move on to other issues. But the government hasn't made any announcements about mining, and it hasn't made any announcements about other industrial use of coal. So coal, coking coal, which is used in the steelmaking process. So as we start to look at the power station situation, you start to look at where does most of the coal come from? And actually, that's not from UK mines. That's from predominantly from Russia, and then also the US and Colombia. And my colleague has spent some time in Colombia with the communities that are affected there, where there's huge issues with water. It's an arid area and water is being taken away by the mine, which means that people can't feed their families and people have awful health problems. And in Colombia, people get shot and assassinated and death threats for their opposition to the large mines. And those large mines are owned by European companies, often listed on the London Stock Exchange. And I think those of us living in the UK have a responsibility, because we have the capacity to protest against these things. And there are threats to people, but nothing like what Rumana has just been describing in Bangladesh, or the experiences that people have in Colombia. And so I feel like we have a moral imperative that we have to stand up to these companies that use the banking system here, but are also listed on the London Stock Exchange. So people who will want to support Rumana's campaign can get involved with the Phulbari Soldarity Group, but also the London Mining Network, which work against coal mines and other sorts of mines internationally, and bring them to a European audience and direct to the shareholders. So yeah, as a tiny organisation, we're working on quite a lot of different fronts.
Yeah, I think you're all amazing. I really do. There's a stout group of women, these. Right, Anne, can you tell us a little bit about, because you're talking about the UK, but are the laws the same, between Wales and Scotland? Do we all have the same approach to opencast, or are there any differences there?
No, so there's differences in planning policy. So Northern Ireland has no coal mines, but one coal power station. Scotland, the last opencast coal mine in Scotland closed last month. Hopefully next month, England will become without coal mines, and we will keep it that way by stopping these 2 new opencasts that banks groups wants, and the one on the West Cumbria coast. In Wales, there's still a few coal mines, but there's no power stations. So there's 3 power stations in England. So each of the parts of the UK has different situations and slightly different planning regulations. The Welsh government recently stopped a mine from operating because it refused to give it a permit. The Welsh equivalent of an MP just said, I'm not signing this off, I'm not allowing this mine to continue, which is a brilliant step. And Wales has taken some really significant steps against coal. But because of how coal is within the country, it's not evenly distributed. It's in the northeast of England, the central part of Scotland and South Wales. It's not, there are not coal mines on the outskirts of London or something like that.
Right. Could you just quickly talk us through the relationship between local and national government, and who the stakeholders are, and who gets to decide about these projects? Because we've seen in Pont, how there are layers. There are layers of processes that you have to get through. So could you just tell us a little bit about that?
So planning decisions are made by local councils. So Northumberland County Council and Newcastle County Council get to decide whether or not a mine can start at Dewley Hill on the outskirts of Newcastle. Government policy also influences what local councils the decisions local councils can make. So although there is a governmental policy that will close the power stations by 2025, there's no governmental policy saying there will be no coal mines in 2025 or before that. And in fact, there's a stockpile of coal in the UK that's big enough to supply all of the amount of coal the UK government says we would burn between now and 2025 already above ground. So there's no need to import any more coal or extract any more coal for power stations, but that doesn't stop the mining. So on a local level, we can try and influence the planning hearings. So Coal Action Network work with the local communities who get in lots of objections to the mines on all sorts of bases of climate change and of local amenity and wildlife impacts, as well as bigger policies. And then the council makes a decision, and then it's possible, but generally doesn't happen, that the government can take a decision out of the local planning hands and make it itself. So that is the situation that has happened, and I think it's the first time that happened with the application to mine at Highthorn by Banks Group, which is on Drurid Bay on the Northumberland coastline. So the Secretary of State, who at the time was Sajid Javid, said that he would make the decision about whether or not that mine could go ahead. And he created an appeal process, and so there was a public inquiry, and planning inspector wrote a report, and Sajid Javid said the mine should not go ahead on landscape value, but also on greenhouse gas emissions. And then the company appealed, and it went to the Court of Appeal, and then the Court of Appeal said that the decision-making process wasn't quite right, and so the Secretary of State needs to remake his decision. Since then, there's been 2 other Secretary of States. So now we're on Robert Jenrick's as the Secretary of State, and he said that he would make a decision just as the COVID pandemic started to hit in the UK, unless COVID made a big impact. And of course, we've not heard anything from him since. But it's really important that he says no to this mine and sets a precedent for the other mines to say, we can't have mining on the shores. Like, as Kathrin said at the beginning, what the UK does is watched around the world. And so the UK needs to be categoric that not only are we going to close the power stations as soon as we possibly can, we also need to stop mining and stop British listed companies mining abroad. So there's lots of strands to this, and it's easy to say, well, the government says we're going to phase out coal and therefore we've won, and that's just too simplistic. If you live in the areas where there are coal mines, then I very much recommend that you get in touch with the local community groups who are fighting those mines and strengthen their numbers, because those people need a lot of support. And as Jax has also said, people are fighting these mines like often for 30 years, so that the change and the persistence is really needed. And the change, it doesn't come from one thing, it won't come overnight. It's really hard fought for, and it's difficult to work out what specific aspects cause the change, but we are seeing really significant changes, like the application to extend in the Pont Valley, which is where Rich was filming, where we were living, where Jax was really involved and her daughter lives really close to. There was an application to extend that mine and it was rejected. And so often mine applications are just, extension applications are just signed off. They're just allowed to happen. But the fact that we got that stopped was huge. And it would be overly simplistic to say, oh, it was this brilliant letter our lawyer wrote, or it was this specific thing. Like, it's because the community have fought for that land for well over 30 years. And people are just saying, no, we're not having it. And so, yeah, a coal mine did start in that area, but the coal runs in a huge area across that land, and a small part of it has been lost, but we won so very much.
Right, that's great. Thanks, thanks, Anne. Rich, Anne mentioned that you'd been making a film.
I'm not sure if I've frozen.
So could you tell us a little bit about that? What motivated you to make a film, and maybe if you could also tell us about the different communities that you have found, and maybe what some differences that you found, because I'm sure all of these different communities carry their own, their own nuances and their own culture, and so could you talk to us a little bit about that, Rich?
Yep. So the documentary is called Finite, and I guess the motivation is that coming from an activist background myself, it often feels like these injustices, these stories of people campaigning and the impacts that people suffer from extractive industries don't really seem to break out of our bubble that often, and especially the ways in which people resist, and everything that comes under that, from the drama, the kind of the ingenuity, the meaning that people get from it. I often feel like news coverage doesn't really go beyond, look at these funny protesters doing funny things. That's what it feels like. Seeing protests on BBC News or something. So yeah, the outline of the film follows two communities. So firstly, in where we've heard in Pont Valley, and it's kind of, the film shows what do people do when all the legal means of challenging something have been used. And it's kind of, it shows how the community have used every trick in the book of campaigning, and how that's had there's still kind of a lot of suffering that comes with fighting these extraction projects, but also success that comes in the end. As Anne was saying, that the extension for the mine in Pont Valley has been called off. So much of the film is kind of showing the human story of like the impact of open cast mining has on people, and I feel like that's a great way to communicate these issues to people without just kind of the abstract science that we often hear about the climate crisis or and whatnot. So the other story that we,
I think you're right, because it's like kind of we get lots of facts and figures, don't we, which can just sometimes blow your mind, and actually what you need to do is kind of feel it. Yeah, and I think that's what is I love films, so that kind of gets to you. You were actually in the Hambach, which is like one of the biggest mines in Europe.
Yeah, so like when I talk to people about this issue, they often say they can't believe that Germany's has destroyed ancient forests to dig up coal, and it's still one of the major coal mining sources in Europe. So the film very much just tries to expose that, tries to draw that to people's attention. And there's also like the Hambach forest has been one of the major catalysts for the climate movement in Europe. So I was kind of involved with making the film over a few years, following people using direct action to defend the forest, and kind of seeing this huge movement just grow and grow and grow to where there's thousands of people taking part in protests to defend the forest, and civil disobedience against coal infrastructure, kind of people using their bodies to stop the diggers, basically. So yeah, like Anne was saying, we have such a privilege in the UK and in Germany that whilst protests people can be repressed for it, we're not fearing for our lives very often, and we have the historical responsibility for being the kind of source of a lot of the coal industry, of extraction. It's kind of combining those things to really say it has to stop. And yeah, this documentary is kind of the story of that, really, on a big scale of like showing the community impacts in Pont Valley, where it's a small village fighting against a mining company, right the way up to like the building of a huge movement in Germany and beyond.
That's great, Rich. Thank you so much. Now I'm just looking at the time, and we're actually coming up to 10 past. I'm not sure what's going to happen. Maybe we'll just sort of disappear into a cloud of smoke or something. I don't know whether we get unplugged or whether we've. I'm not really sure. Probably. Unfortunately, you're going to have to wrap it up now. I really wish that we'd been able to have a little bit more time for a discussion, because I think everybody brings so much different experience here. And I know it's how important it is that we understand how all of these things link together. And, because I'm just going to say this, I recently discovered, only through Coal Action Network, bringing people over to the Pont Valley from Colombia and hearing their story, I realised that actually our county council invests money into their pensions, and we discovered that part of the pension money is actually funding the mine in Colombia, and that brought that connection so much closer. And so I think it's good that we're all talking and sharing these stories. And I would like anybody who's concerned about coal, please go and do your own research on you know, the Phulbari Solidarity campaign, and the, you know, there's all sorts of campaigns in Russia. Colombia's been mentioned, the US has been mentioned, and of course our things at home. So I really do hope I'm going to get to talk to you, some of you again, because I would really love to hear more. But it's 10 past, and I've been told we're finished now. So thank you everybody for giving us your time. And I hope that everyone out there, I hope you've gleaned something and learned something from our guests. So until the next time. Oh, I see. Okay, I think there's going to be a graphic coming soon. And we'll all get this. Does anybody else want to, while we've got a few more minutes, does anybody feel that there are any, I'm kind of interested in the social justice, but I think we're going to switch us off. No. Oh, thanks for muting us there.